Squirrels have been watching you, but not in the way you think. You've seen that squirrel before.
The one that sits on your fence or pauses halfway up a tree when you step outside. It doesn't run immediately. It watches. And after a while, you start to wonder, is it the same one? In many cases, it is. But what looks like curiosity is actually something much more important. That squirrel isn't watching you out of interest. It's watching you because its survival depends on understanding you. To a squirrel, the world is not casual or relaxed. Every movement in its environment carries meaning. Every sound could signal danger. Every open space is a calculated risk. They live inside what biologists call a constant risk assessment loop, where every decision is based on one question: is this safe enough? And when you step into your yard, you become part of that calculation. Not just once, but repeatedly, over time. At first, you are a problem. You're large, unpredictable, and capable of sudden movement. From the squirrel's perspective, that places you in the same general category as a potential predator. So it does what prey animals do best. It observes. Not in a deliberate human way, but through repeated exposure. Each time you appear, your behavior gets compared to what happened before. Did you move quickly? Did you make loud noise? Did anything dangerous follow your presence? If the answer is consistently no, something begins to change. The squirrel doesn't decide to trust you. It doesn't assign you an identity or intention. But it does begin to treat you as a familiar pattern. This process is known as habituation. It's how wild animals adjust to repeated, non-threatening stimuli in their environment. And in urban spaces, it's happening constantly. Squirrels, birds, and other wildlife are learning the rhythms of human life, when people are active, how they move, and which behaviors signal disruption versus stability. If you walk into your yard the same way each day, at roughly the same times, with the same pace and posture, you become predictable. And in the wild, predictability reduces uncertainty, but that doesn't mean you've been accepted. It means you've been categorized. Because at the same time squirrels are adapting to you, they are also mapping risk across the entire environment. Ecologists refer to this as the landscape of fear. It's not about where predators are at any given moment. It's about where they could be, and how likely they are to appear. A single roaming cat, for example, can shift this entire landscape. Even if it never makes a kill, its presence alone changes how squirrels use the space. Areas that once felt usable can become too exposed. Feeding spots get abandoned. Movement patterns shift. And importantly, this has nothing to do with how much food is available. Safety always comes first. Your yard exists inside that map. If the space is quiet, consistent, and relatively free of sudden threats, squirrels are more likely to use it regularly. If it's noisy, erratic, or associated with danger, they'll avoid it, even if there's food. And this is where their behavior becomes more revealing. One of the clearest signs that a squirrel has adapted to your presence is how it uses the ground itself. Squirrels don't just eat food, they store it. This behavior, known as caching, involves burying nuts and seeds in scattered locations to retrieve later. But caching is not random. It's influenced by perceived risk. A squirrel is less likely to invest time burying food in areas where it feels constantly exposed or threatened. Digging and covering food takes focus, and focus reduces awareness. That makes it a vulnerable moment. So when a squirrel consistently caches food in your yard, it suggests something specific. The environment, including your behavior, falls within an acceptable level of risk. Not perfectly safe, but safe enough. You can also see this in how squirrels respond to you directly. If you step outside and a squirrel immediately gives sharp alarm calls, flicks its tail, or sprints away, it still categorizes you as a high-risk presence. But if it pauses, watches briefly, and then continues what it was doing, or moves away quietly without alarm, that's different. That's a reduced threat response. And that response is built over time. Not because the squirrel understands you, but because your past behavior has been consistent enough to predict. That's the key idea here. Squirrels are not tracking you as an individual with identity, personality, or intent. But they are highly sensitive to patterns. Your size, your speed, your timing, your noise level. All of these become part of a behavioral profile, not of who you are, but of what typically happens when you appear. And that profile is always updating. If your behavior suddenly changes, loud music, fast movement, unpredictable activity, that profile changes too. Sometimes immediately. Which is why people often notice something strange. A yard that once had regular wildlife activity suddenly goes quiet. Not because the animals disappeared at random, but because something in the environment crossed their risk threshold. And once that threshold is crossed, it can take time and consistency to return to previous levels of activity. So what's actually happening when you see the same squirrel over and over again? It's not forming a relationship in the human sense, but it is doing something just as important for its survival. It is learning. Learning that your presence follows a pattern. Learning that your yard meets a certain balance between food and safety. Learning that, at least for now, staying is less costly than leaving. Most people think they're just sharing space with wildlife, but the reality is more precise than that. Every day, the animals around you are collecting information, testing boundaries, adjusting their behavior based on what changes and what stays the same. And if a squirrel keeps returning, staying calm, and using your yard as part of its routine, that tells you something very specific. Not that it trusts you completely, but that, based on everything it has experienced so far, you are predictable enough to live around. And for a prey animal, that's a meaningful place to be. Have you ever noticed a squirrel becoming less reactive to you over time, or suddenly disappearing when something changed? Share your experience in the comments. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next video.